Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Scope podcast. And today I'm back with a topic that's specific to the time of year. And of course, we just passed on, or we just surpassed the MLK Day. So happy MLK Day to everybody, Martin Luther King Jr. and his efforts to the country and what he did for the country. We still have a long, long ways to go, and we've been set back recently, but um, his contributions won't be forgotten and will always be remembered every year because of this special holiday. And just take the time to sit back and remember how far we came as a country. No matter how much the country want us to forget it, we still honor and celebrate the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So today's topic, I'm highlighting some of the top social activists or social civil rights leaders that we've had that happen to be athletes, who sports figures who changed the sports world by their commentary and by their actions and by the movements that they made behind the scenes to make sure that, mostly people of color and people that were ostracized and people that was marginalized were afforded some of the same things that we were promised as this country so promised us, the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, all those types of things. So there's been a lot of social justice warriors that were athletes as well, that changed the landscape of not only sports, but the world as we know it. Athletes who had a brand and didn't really care about protecting their brand, but more about protecting their people, protecting the underdog, protecting the what is considered the lower ranks of society. These people who or athletes who spoke up for something bigger than themselves. They put their in a sense in essence they put their last names first. So these are the athletes that I were talking about. So one athlete for sure is Muhammad Ali, an athlete who gave up most of his prime years as a boxer to oppose the war, back during his time. His right to be a conscious objector, his rights as a Muslim man to oppose war when he didn't want to do war, and he made comments saying that I don't have any weaponry background, I don't operate firearms, I fight with my hands, I don't fight with weapons, and I don't fight people who I don't have any problems with. He was given a lot of flack for that, but with his faith, he didn't believe in war and things like that. So he was able to take take the government to court, and he actually won. But he did lose years off his prime, and he lost a lot of money from it, and he lost probably fans too back then because people were on the bandwagon of you're dodge war, that you're dodging war, and you're doing things like that. So he had to face a lot of turmoil in order to get to where he is today because he wasn't appreciated back then when he was fighting his fight. No pun intended. But nowadays he's seen more in a more higher light because most people, somewhat understood his views. But back then, everyone was like, well, you did wrong to the country, so they didn't see him that way. But a lot of times when these activists and people like that go through the fight that they go through, they're not seen in the best light until decades later, i.e., a Dr. Martin Luther King. A lot of people were against what he was doing with just his views and the way he wanted people to come together. But now he has his own holiday. He's seen in the greatest of lights. Um, but sometimes you have to go through that turmoil in order to get your recognition, that you so deserve. That most of these people were seeking these things, but they definitely deserve the recognition and praise for what and adulation for what they were doing. But unfortunately, when you're in the thick of the moment, you're never going to get that praise. You're going to get criticism, and you're going to get uh, held in low regard. So, kudos to Muhammad Ali for sticking through what he was doing, because he definitely was more appreciated after he retired from boxing and throughout the later years of his career and in his life. for sure. And another guy is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, he was he was a very huge supporter of Muhammad Ali not going to the war. He was a Muslim man as well, ironically. But he did stand with Ali in his opposition to the war, and Kareem did a lot of behind the scenes, um, with the justice and social rights and civil rights and things like that. He was a major advocate for civil rights. He even missed the '68 Olympics due to not, to the unjust treatment of African Americans in this country. So Kareem's past is, he's been doing this for decades and decades, and he's still an advocate. But missing the Olympics in '68 was a huge deal, especially as a black man when we didn't have a lot of representation in the Olympics. But he made a stand and he stood on it, and he's one of those guys that had a brand that had this image that he still sacrificed and made it bigger than himself. He was one of those guys too that experienced racism, especially in the '60s when he was coming up, and '50s and things like that, because they even made rules to where he was over 7 foot, and most of his competition was a little bit shorter. So they banned dunking. So he couldn't even dunk the basketball. And that rule was specifically made for him. And then it was made for Wilt and other people like that. But definitely for Kareem, because of his height and the dominance that he had, and especially the dominance he had in college. I think he only lost one entire game in college. So it was just amazing what he was able to do, but he still put that on the back burner to work with guys like a Jim Brown and a guy like Bill Russell, and the advocacy that they had back in the time where they could have lost their careers, but most importantly, could have lost their lives. So those guys did a huge justice for civil rights and social injustice, just speaking on those things and putting their careers and even lives on the line for what they did. Which Bill Russell is another guy who experienced racism at the highest level playing in Boston. Growing up in California, it probably was a little bit more neutral or a little bit more covert. But when you go to Boston, it was definitely more overt, especially for him to be a superstar of the team and for what he did for the city, bringing all those championships. I believe he went to 12 championships and won 11 rings, which no player probably would ever match that in history, or at least not in our lifetime, at least. But what he was able to do for social injustice in a time where he was living in a predominantly white city and he was the minority, and they didn't treat him with kid gloves or anything like that. And he talked about the stories of his room being smeared with feces and all of this stuff, and the racist rhetoric that they spewed to him and things like that. And for him to be such an advocate of social justice, especially when he was such a target at that time, the just the press conferences he had with Jim Brown and Kareem and Muhammad Ali and these guys were just amazing for what these guys stood for. Opposed to players now, these guys really didn't care about brands. Brands really wasn't a thing, but you still had to make nice with the owners and stuff like that so you didn't cut from a team, because there were only so many black players on a team back then. So they only had, it was like a quote, unspoken quota of how many black players you can have on a team. But, Bill Russell was kind of like in that advantageous spot where he was kind of like LeBron. He controlled a lot of the market. He was one of the only players that could really deal with Wilt Chamberlain, even though he was 6'9" and Wilt Chamberlain was like 7'1". He was one of the few players that actually could somewhat contain him, but he still was averaging like 30 and 30. But Bill Russell was one of those guys that was special and unique. And rest in peace to Bill Russell as well. But his bravery won't go unnoticed. So those are some of the guys that I wanted to mention or highlight that's from the past. But the guys now, guys like LeBron James, he's one of those guys that's underrated as a social, activist or social, even doing social commentary. He's one of those guys that, he has a lot of antics off the court and people have a stigma about him and things like that. But he always speaks up when there's social injustice. And I remember one of the biggest things was the "I Can't Breathe" shirts when he was in Miami, and this was during the, um, BLM movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, and he wore those shirts and um, just the commentary he provided about issues that we have in this country. He speaks, very candidly or very he doesn't mince words about, the leadership we have in this country, unlike a Tom Brady or somebody like that. He really goes out there and puts it on the line, opposed to a lot of these athletes who are trying to protect their brand. But LeBron is in a different spot because he controls a lot of the NBA. He's a big source of their income, so they really can't cancel him, opposed to these other smaller players who might speak out, which another guy I'll talk about in a little bit. If he had that power, he would have never been in that spot. But what he's done with the I Promise School and helping, the underserved communities go to college. If you graduate from that school, you get a free tuition to Akron, Ohio, to the University of Akron, sorry. And you get free tuition, and your parents get help with GEDs if they don't have one, and they get bikes to school and all these different privileges that they have that the average school doesn't. And LeBron funds that strictly from his budget. So it's amazing what he's able to do, and they don't talk about it enough. But of course, if LeBron, knock on wood, ever get in trouble legally or a lawsuit or something like that, it's a big deal. But they don't talk about the I Promise School because, of course, it's not the sexy topic. It's not what sells, right? But they should definitely highlight these things because kids growing up today only see the bad being highlighted. They don't see the good things, and the good things that LeBron does goes unnoticed because he's such in opposition to tyranny or um, just people being bullies and things like that. So uh, of course, when you do that, you're not going to be seen in the highest light. But of course, when you retire and later in your career, then you'll be put on T-shirts and um, you know all kind of memorabilia and stuff like that, and people be acting like they were always fans of you. But when you were out in the thick of the fight, people were kind of talking on your name and things like that. I.e., what Muhammad Ali had to go through. People didn't wasn't the best fans of him back then, but now you can see him wearing T-shirts and saying, "Oh, I was always a Muhammad Ali fan." But then, their parents probably was in huge opposition to Muhammad Ali, and it was a big thing to do back then. But now it's cool to do it. Now people want to do it. So it's one of those things. And one of the biggest people that I want to highlight was Colin Kaepernick. He is one of the athletes who definitely sacrificed the most in far as terms of career because he lost his career as he opposed the unjust killing of black men in this country. Um, something that he was ahead of the time or ahead of the curve on, because later the NFL came out with these social messages talking about, hate racism and um, all of these messages that were pro black in the stands came after the Colin Kaepernick fiasco. And it really showed us the true colors of a lot of these owners, and no pun intended on that. But a lot of owners like Jerry Jones, who told his players, if you don't stand for national anthem, you won't be playing for my team. Which I don't think he would have did that with his top players. I think he did that with the lesser players, but none of them did it. Jerry Jones also, was seen at a protest as a kid at the Ruby Bridges protest when she was in school in Arkansas and they was integrating the schools, and he never made any commentary about why he was there. And unfortunately, he was able to escape that, and there wasn't a lot of social media commentary about it. It just kind of went blank after a couple of days, and it was very odd to see because if the shoe was on the other foot, we knew that story would have never died down. There definitely would have been consequences, but somehow Jerry Jones escaped all that. But we know why. The Texans owner who um, said you can't have players running the asylum. That was crazy, but he showed you his true colors. But that's Texas. Both of those are Texas teams with strong Texas owners with who have these views that we know what their views are, and their opposition to anything helping Black people or helping anybody in smaller communities or people without money specifically ascend anywhere or having any kind of rights other than working for them at low minimum wage prices or below the poverty threshold. We know that is what those guys are about. Um, but Colin Kaepernick, the the moment he had with the Nike program, with the um, messages that they put out, and the strong support he had from Nike, Nike probably is not seen as strongly as it was back then. But a lot of people opposed Nike for taking a stance with Colin Kaepernick, but they made it about politics, but it was about saving people's lives. Anytime you're trying to save people's lives, people say, "I don't do politics. I don't talk politics. I don't do politics." It's not about politics; it's about saving lives. Most of the people who are dying, we don't care, or they don't care about these politics. They're caring about seeing their family members survive and being treated humanly, as we were promised by the Constitution. Um, Making it about politics is a cop out, because most people don't really care about politics. They just want to be able to be safe and make money and live their lives without being disrupted and being treated fairly. Politics has nothing to do with it. You bring up politics by being obtuse, and you're bringing up politics just to be simply just to divert from the situation. Because if you bring up politics, then nobody can really talk about it in certain settings. So when you bring up politics, that just let me know where your mind is. But that's a story for another day. But tell me, what are your thoughts about the social activists that were athletes as well? And until next time, I'll see you next time.